And then in the next part here, he says, وَمِنْ اجْتِنَابُ نَجَاسَةٍ لَا يُعْفَى عَنْهَا فَمَنْ حَمَلَهَا أَوْ لَاقَاهَا بِبَدْنِهِ أَوْ ثَوْبِهِ لَمْ تَصِحَّ صَلَاتُهُ. Okay, so this is going to move on to the next prerequisite or condition of prayer, which is going to be about avoiding impurities. And so he says here, basically, they also include, meaning the conditions of prayer, avoiding getting inexcusable impurity on the body, clothes, or their location, meaning the location of the body or the location of the clothes where you're going to pray, put your body, and where your clothes will be put or will fall while in prayer, as well as handling any impurity. So you have to avoid handling impurity while in prayer. This is based on a number of explicit evidences. One such is a hadith of Prophet ﷺ. He says, "Stay away from urine, for it is the cause of widespread punishment in the grave." Imam Ad-Darqutni has reported this in his collection of hadith. It's also a hadith, very famous hadith, in which the Prophet ﷺ passed by two graves, commented about their punishment in the grave being the result of them not preventing urine from getting on their clothes, as well as the verse in Surah Al-Mudaththir, verse number 4. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says what means, "And your clothes purify them." And your clothes purify them. What's most obvious of this verse, considering that the idolaters, they did not purify themselves or their clothing, is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is commanding that garments be purified from najasa, the najasa which is not permitted to pray with. So that would be inexcusable impurity. And this explanation is literal, as opposed to a metaphorical explanation, which is fine when necessary, but given precedence here because it makes the most sense. It could be said, okay, the Prophet ﷺ was once offering prayers at the Kaaba, and Abu Jahl was sitting with some of his companions. One of them said to the others, "Who among you will bring the abdominal contents of this camel of Bani so-and-so," meaning it was a camel that was slaughtered recently, "and put it on the back of Muhammad ﷺ when he prostrates?" So the most horrid, unfortunate of them got up and brought it back. He waited until the Prophet ﷺ prostrated, and then he placed it on his back between his shoulders. Allah's Messenger ﷺ was in prostration. He remained there with that on his back and did not lift his head up till Fatima, who was of course his daughter, radiallahu anha, came and removed it from his back. And we would say, very unfortunate scenario, illustrates the difficulties that the Prophet ﷺ faced. It's narrated by Imam al-Bukhari. This occurrence took place in Mecca. Of course, this was before Islam became very widespread, likely before the 5 prayers were obligated, and the order to purify the clothing and to avoid ritual impurities had been completely settled, as supported by the numerous other ahadith that were revealed during the time of Medina. And so therefore, it's considered that those hadith that were revealed in Medina would have abrogated any such excuse to pray in a state like this. So ijtinab al-najasa, and we're going to talk about what you should do in the event that najasa were put on you or fall on you while in prayer. So with the general prerequisite of avoiding impurity, therefore, the prayer of whoever carries an inexcusable amount of impurity, even if it's in a container, like a closed container, such that it's not on the outside of the container, but it's sealed inside, or comes in bodily contact with, or has it, the impurity on their clothes, is not valid. The prayer is not valid. And the invalidity is the result of not meeting this prerequisite. And the principle that we're working here with this is al-amru bi-shay nahyun an ضده والنهي عنه في العبادات يقتضي الفساد. Okay, and this means that the command of something is a prohibition of its opposite. So the command is to stay away from, avoid impurities. So prohibitions is to be pure of those things. So to be soiled of those things is impermissible. And prohibitions in worship result in them being invalid. It results in them being invalid. So we said an inexcusable amount. So what is an excusable amount of impurity? An excusable amount of impurity would be like holding someone who performed istijmar. Holding a child, for example, or someone that performed istijmar, because we know that istijmar leaves behind traces of impurity, and that is excusable, so long as it is on the location of origin. If those trace amounts were elsewhere, then it would not be considered excusable. Or carrying a pure animal, like a cat, for example. Okay, that may have traces of impurity. What were to happen if you were praying and impurity were to fall on you while praying, or put on you? You could continue to pray and your prayer would be valid so long as it was quickly removed, or did not require that you move an abundant amount. If it got on your clothing and you could remove it quickly, then you can continue and your prayer would be valid. But if it required you to now start scrubbing and washing, then the movement itself would be too much to continue in prayer. This is based on an incident which took place when the Prophet ﷺ was leading prayer and removed his shoes, placing them on his left side. And the people that were praying behind him saw him do that, and so they removed their shoes as well. And after the prayer, the Prophet ﷺ asked them why they removed their shoes, and they said, "We saw you remove your shoes, so we removed our shoes." No need for an explanation. They just did. And then he explained to them that Jibreel ﷺ came to him to inform him of some filth on his shoes. So the moment that he was informed of the filth, he removed the shoes immediately and continued in his prayer. It's collected by Imam Abu Dawud. So here you can see what a course of action would be in the event that something got on you while in prayer. Another side issue is that touching an impure garment or an impure wall, because it's not touching another impure garment, because it's not the place of prayer. Okay? If it's transferred, now it's on you, it has to be taken off. If you just touched it and there's no transfer, then you're fine, because this is not the place of prayer. If the impure wall was not one you were leaning on or supporting yourself such that if it was removed, you would fall. If you were leaning on or supporting yourself with something that had najasa on it, then it would be the same ruling as the place of prayer. And so it would be invalid. Another issue is facing impurity while bowing or prostrating without coming in contact with it, or even standing over it such that your feet are straddling a location which is impure. The prayer is valid because you're not coming in contact with it. That's why it's important to understand from the beginning the body, the clothing, and the place of the body and clothing. And so long as you are not standing on it or coming in contact with it, then the prayer is valid. So, back to the issue of impurity being on the ground. He says, radiyallahu anhu, وَإِن طَيَّنَا أَرْضًا نَجِسَةً أَوْ فَرَشَهَا سَفِيقًا ظَاهِرًا صَحَّتْ وَكُرِهَا. It's disliked, though valid, to pray on impure ground covered by dirt or carpeted by something pure and thick. And the thickness has to be such that any moist impurity would not seep through to the top. And so in the event that, you had to cover, you could not clean the impurity, but you had to cover it, you could use a rug or something of that nature to cover over it. And if it was thick enough so that it wouldn't bleed through, then you could pray on it as you normally would. And this is an important topic here. Someone just sent a question recently about being incarcerated and held in a location that was impure. So this would be the go-to if they could cover it. If they could cover the impurity with something like a prayer rug thick enough or towels or sheets or something, then they could pray on top of that like they normally would. Otherwise, they would default to praying in that location without making sujood on the moist impurity, as we discussed previously. The same thing applies to covering an impure animal or praying on a carpet which only the bottom side was impure. Praying on an impure animal, it's noted that you can pray while riding in some circumstances, and you may be riding on, for example, a donkey, or you could be riding on any other impure animal. And so if the animal was covered so that you were not coming in contact with that, then it would be valid, though disliked. The prayer would be valid because they're not carrying or holding impurity or coming in direct contact with it. It's disliked because they're reliant upon something which is invalid to pray upon without the covering. So that's where you get valid but disliked at. He goes on and he says, وَتَصِحُ عَلَى طَاهِرٍ بِطَرَفِهِ نَجَاسَةٌ لَا إِن تَعَلَّقَ بِهِ نَجِسٌ يَنْجَرُّ بِمَشِّهِ. Says the prayer is valid on something pure which has something impure on its edge that they will not come in contact with, even if it moves as a result of their movement in prayer. This is important to distinguish with this issue and the issue coming up. Like if a person was standing on ropes that are bound to impurity, they're tied to impurity at the end of that rope, and they're standing on that rope and they're praying, some type of flooring or something that has impurity, and even if they moved and it caused that impurity to move, their prayer would still be valid. But not if something impure is attached to one standing, which will move when they move, such as a person who has a leash of a dog in their hand. That would be perhaps the most relevant example in today's world, where many Muslims, some Muslims own dogs. Or it could be another animal, for example, that they have with them, and they're just trying to retain the animal from leaving. So if you're holding that leash, for example, and basically the animal is of a size which if you move, the animal will move with you. Or if you're holding like a small boat while you're standing ashore or something praying, and that boat is filled with najasa, and if you moved, the boat would move with you. The ruling is similar to one who is carrying impurity. You're carrying najasa. And the same applies to a child soiled with inexcusable impurity. A child that grabs a hold of you during prayer. Obviously, holding the child is one thing altogether. Okay, so if the child is soiled, you cannot carry the child in prayer. But what happens when the child's running and playing around and grabs a hold of you? If the child is such that if you moved, the child would go with you, right? They're hanging on your leg. What would you do in this scenario? It would be like if the najasa fell on you, you would have to quickly remove that child from your leg, or if they came and sat down on your lap while you were sitting, this is a very common thing. While our hearts are soft and we may want to just have them sit there, if we know they're soiled, you have to take them off of the lap. And then after the prayer, they can sit on your lap, no problem. Soiled diaper and all.
But you remove the najasa and then do you make wudu again?
No, in this case, if the child is sitting on your lap, they have a diaper on or something. I mean, if najasa gets on you and you can't remove it, then that's another story. We're talking about the najasa is contained, for example, within a diaper. Okay, it's there on you. You're holding it, even though it's contained. Remember, we said even if najasa was in a container, like a bag, like if you're in the hospital and you have a bag which is collecting waste, it's sealed. It's a closed environment. It's not like it's loose on your body. That is carrying najasa. It has to be emptied out. Here, with the child that's wearing the diaper, that's been soiled or has inexcusable najasa on them, they have to be taken off. If they're clinging to your body or holding on to you or sitting on your lap, they have to be taken off. Back to the issue of being tied or holding something by the hand. You're holding it in your hand or wrapped around your waist or something. If it's something that won't move, it won't move if you move. It's a very large animal, like an impure animal, like it's an elephant that you're riding on. It would be valid because it doesn't fall in the ruling of you carrying the object. You have no control over its movement as if you were carrying it, or if it was a very large ship that had impurity on it. Like you were just holding the rope of that ship, and on the ship was a bathroom, and in that bathroom there was waste. You were just holding its rope. You're not going to move it around. In that case, it doesn't fall in the same category. You have no control over. He says, وَمَنْ وَجَدَ بِهِ نَجَاسَةً بَعْدَ صَلَاتِهِ وَعَلِمَ أَنَّا كَانَتْ فِيهَا لَكِنْ نَسِيَ وَنَحْوُهُ أَعَادَ وَإِلَّا فَلَهُ. Whoever notices inexcusable impurity on themselves, their clothing, or that location of the body or the clothing for prayer, and they notice this after prayer, and knows that it was present during prayer, but forgot that it was present. How's that possible? They knew that it was on them, but then they forgot and they prayed. And then after they realized, oh yeah, that was there before prayer. Yeah. Or they were unaware of it. But they knew that, yep, I didn't see that, but I know where I got it from. It was before prayer. Or they did not know the ruling that was not allowed on the clothing. They must repeat the prayer. Just like someone who forgetfully prayed without wudu. Okay? If they did not know that it was present during the prayer, then there's no requirement to make it up, because it could have gotten soiled after the prayer, right? The prayer is not invalidated due to doubt. So this requires you to know that that was there. Even if you forgot that it was there, but you know that it was there during prayer. If it's questionable afterwards, yeah, I don't know. Maybe it happened later. So we're going to go with the al-asal is that it's not there. And then it was picked up at some point after that.
So this time I remember one who carries just مثلا soil blood. For example, you put it in your pocket.
Yeah.
And you totally forgot about it.
Yeah.
You only remember I saw.
You got, you, you, got, 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 you, got Yeah, and then you went, oh yeah, this happened before prayer. I took this off, I put it in here. Yeah, so now you were carrying it and you knew that it was during prayer, it has to be repeated. Yeah.
But if you didn't know, you don't have to.
If
No, you
you
put it inside.
No, I'm just saying if a person has some najasa on them, but they didn't know that it was on them. Had no
Or maybe
idea
on
that
your
they
clothing, it's like I guess,
Yeah.
and you found out that I guess, like you said, it could be happening after the prayer.
Right.
or let's say, for example, the kid that sat on your lap.
So,
You didn't know
whether it had-
that his diaper was soiled,
that's good.
but then later afterwards, you found out, oh, the diaper's soiled,
and it was on.
then you have nothing to do at this point. But if you knew the diaper was soiled before or during, you could tell that the diaper was soiled. He sat on you, the diaper's obviously, it's filled or there's an odor. Then in that case, you didn't move the child off, you let the child sit, then you would have to repeat the prayer. Okay, here he goes on, he says, وَمَنْ جُبِرَ عَظْمُهُ أَوْ خِيطَ جُرْحُهُ بِنَجِسٍ لَمْ يَجِبْ إِزَالَتُهُ مَعَ ضَرَرٍ. He says, whoever's bone has been set with an impure bone, or wound has been stitched with impurity, meaning that there's impure stitching, which then heals. The bone or the wound then heals, and those things are still there. It's not required to remove it if it's deemed harmful to do so, such that they could lose their life or limb or become ill due to the removal. So basically, we're talking about there's najasa on you, and it's there for such a purpose. What do you do? If the skin has healed over it, tayammum is not required. Remember, we said that tayammum would suffice if you had najasa on the body that you couldn't remove. But if the skin has healed over it, tayammum is not required because it's now under the skin, it's hidden. It's considered like the blood that's running through your veins or the digested matter in your body. Okay? If the skin has not healed over it and those things are left exposed, tayammum is made for the impurity on the body that can't be removed. If harm is not feared, meaning that you wouldn't lose your life or limb or become ill, then those impurities must be removed. Last section here he says, وَمَا سَقَطَ مِنْهُ مِنْ عُضْوٍ أَوْ سِنٍّ طَاهِرٌ. Whatever is removed from them, such as a limb or a tooth, is pure from the human body. It can be reattached, and prayer will be valid because it's pure. If a tooth or bone is replaced with something from a ritually slaughtered animal, the prayer will also be valid because those things are pure now after the slaughtering. So if, it's not a practice today, but in the past it may have been to replace a tooth with a sheep tooth. And if the sheep was slaughtered correctly, then that tooth and all of the remains, they would be pure and could be utilized for such purposes. Otherwise, no. And that's where we'll wrap it up for today. Jazakallah khair.